everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
DanMachi, why am I being crowned the Lord of Cinder? Chapter 144 to 151. Chapter 144, the dungeon is setting us up. 1948 words. Ron did not feel the slightest bit fortunate about having broken through to LV3. Because next, what was heading toward the battlefield was a ferocious giant dragon whose wingspan was even larger than its body, its surface covered in thick, pale scales. It seemed to have passed through long, ancient years. This giant dragon was filled with an archaic, weathered aura. When it sensed that intruders had arrived, it slowly opened those crimson dragon eyes that had long been asleep. Red lightning continuously danced across the ancient dragon's back. It was like a Tesla coil running at full power. Before the battle had even truly begun, Ron had already sensed oppressive pressure from the enormous monster before him. Especially its classic four-legged, four-winged appearance. Ancient dragon. Lanciax. He could not help but think of the dragon girl boss from Elden Ring. The enormous monster before him did have some differences, but that violent aura was practically about to overflow. So the dungeon swapped out the rare infant dragon and put an ancient dragon in my way, huh? In Ron's impression, ancient dragon Lanciax could be said to be quite a troublesome boss in Elden Ring. Its body was relatively slender, making it difficult to lock onto as a monster. However, part of the reason it was troublesome also came from the limitations of a Souls-like. Without showing it, he glanced behind him. The cave passage had already been completely sealed off. If they wanted to leave the arena, the only way was the path behind the ancient dragon. Among the methods he currently had at his disposal, the only character save slots with combat ability at this stage were the Tarnished and Sekiro, and the combat arts he currently possessed were all still extremely primitive. The moment that thought arose, he completely snuffed it out. Running away was not a means of solving the problem. Ron could practically guess the nature of this damn Souls-like dungeon already. If he wanted to head deeper, then he had to completely kill the ancient dragon on the current floor. He had the number of revivals granted by revival. There was absolutely no problem with him serving as the main offensive force in this battle, not to mention that there was also the magic Futsunamatama mastered by Mikoto. After determining the objective ahead, he did not make the team atmosphere especially grim. In a relaxed tone, he said, "Prepare for battle." She had long since adapted to the daily routine of the Souls-like dungeon. And having also gone through the tempering of the Erdtree burial watchdog, Mikoto did not shrink back because of the giant dragon before her, which clearly looked extremely powerful. She held her katana in both hands and quickly entered a combat-ready state. On the other hand, Daphne and Cassandra, when they saw the enormous monster before them, the worldview that had already been overturned was now completely shattered. A giant dragon. That enormous body, compared to it, they were like something on the roadside that could be crushed to death at will. Is this right? Although she had mentally prepared herself for future dungeon exploration to be extremely difficult, Daphne had never imagined that danger would be shoved right in front of them before they even reached the middle floors. That's right. It was the existence of this floor boss being shoved directly in front of her. Inside the dungeon, the environment of each floor was basically fixed and did not change. Yet just in those past moments, the ground had kept trembling. The familiar cave passage had been completely changed, forming a broad environment like a death arena, and even cutting off every route of retreat. The floor boss before them had not even begun fighting yet. Yet the oppressive pressure crashing over them already brought Daphne an extremely dangerous feeling. Very right. Hearing the girl's life-doubting murmur, no amount of verbal description about how dangerous the dungeon environment was could compare to letting Daphne personally experience the characteristics of the Souls-like style. The key was, this was only the beginning. Having experienced quite a few special floor bosses, feeling nervous when facing this kind of monster was only natural, but what Ron felt more was a faint anticipation in his heart. For example, things like rolling boulder traps in passages leading straight to a floor boss room are just part of the daily routine we need to adapt to. You'll get used to it little by little later. There was still a later. Of course Daphne would not say something like that out loud. Now was not the time to back down. Since there was no retreat at all, then they had to seek a chance of survival in this desperate situation. To find that faint sliver of hope. From the corner of her eye, she glanced at her close friend Cassandra behind her, gripping her staff with both hands. The fear of encountering a giant dragon had made even her pupils tremble. She could even hear her broken murmurs, "This is the giant dragon that appeared in my dream last night. It's really strong. It'll wipe out our party in the dungeon." The girl's dispirited words were especially conspicuous in the empty, silent arena. Saying such things in private was one thing, but right in front of Captain Ron, Daphne had just been about to stop her when she saw the upright boy beside her slowly turn around. Cassandra. She had just wanted to explain her close friend's slip of the tongue, yet she saw that on Ron's face, there was not the slightest trace of anger. Instead, his tone was gentler than ever before. "Trust me. Trust that our team will win." As for her impression of Ron, it remained only at the image from before the war game, his ruthless decisiveness in killing. Even the god Apollo, this guy had dared to attack directly. This was the one side of him Daphne had never seen. But before she could even marvel at that, before they had even had time to discuss a battle plan, she saw the boy silently remove the strange equipment he wore, leaving only that great sword, great fortune. And then, the figure of his back, charging fearlessly toward ancient dragon Lanciax. As for the atmosphere within the Familia party, Cassandra was always gloomy and worried all day long, while Makoto was like a combat machine, strictly carrying out battle orders. As for the captain, Ron's hands were already itching. He was desperately eager to fight the ancient dragon. Why is there even a reckless idiot here? Daphne only felt utterly exhausted, but she still played her part in this battle of utterly unequal strength. She chanted quickly. Magic power surged continuously, and in the dim arena, a cold white glow rose up, applying defensive magic to Ron up ahead. "Cassandra, don't just stand there. It should be fine. Even if the rare infant dragon has been strengthened by the dungeon, it probably can't be that strong. The key thing is its size, it's right there. Speed is my advantage." As for a battle plan, Ron's view was that a Souls veteran simply did not need one. As long as his combat skills were good enough, he had a chance to conquer the ancient dragon floor boss before him. At most, it was just a matter of how many lives it would cost. Since things had come to this, then battle it was. When his level rose to LV3, the most obvious improvement was speed. Even holding a greatsword as heavy as a brass shield, his speed still did not decrease. Each time he stepped forward, Ron's figure surged nearly 10 meters ahead. As he advanced across the altered terrain, fine spiderweb cracks shattered outward beneath his steps. It seemed to realize that an adventurer as tiny as an ant was approaching it. Lanciax lowered its slender neck, bowing the proud head of dragonkind. Within those crimson eyes, there was only fury at being offended. That deep and heavy roar spread outward through the ancient dragon's unique vocal organs. The high-frequency sound waves reaching his ears produced a buzzing hum. It brought an intensely uncomfortable stinging pain. The enormous monster raised its claw and slammed it heavily toward the ground. The instant it touched the earth, the violent shockwave shattered the rocky floor in front of it. It was like a seismic zone created with its bare hand. The ruptured ground surged forward, carrying shattered rock fragments as it swept toward Ron. What the hell? Even being conservative, this thing's at least LV4, right? Keeping his mind in a state of extreme concentration, Ron naturally caught the ancient dragon's opening attack in his sight. Watching those cracks racing toward him, his movements did not pause in the slightest. The shinobi prosthetic that had already been attached to his left arm, he decisively fired the claw, trailing a rope, toward the floor boss's leg in the distance. Before the shockwave could sweep over him, the sharp hook successfully embedded itself into a gap between the giant dragon's scales. Ron shot forward, borrowing the pulling force like a long jump, rapidly closing in on the floor boss. Only by clearly understanding one's own advantages could one win this hopelessly uneven battle. And as if it had noticed that tiny reptile drawing near, the giant dragon Lanciac swung those incomparably sharp claws, as though tearing through the air, to smack this hateful human adventurer to death right here. This thing was definitely stronger than every floor boss he had encountered before. Faced with the ancient dragon's sweeping strike, the shock of those claws expanding from far to near was hard to describe. But there was no time for Ron to lose focus. He decisively cut off the rope's pull. Adjusting his posture, he lowered his body and rolled forward. After dodging the ancient dragon's claw strike, the violent wind that swept over him almost made his already adjusted footing stumble. You really think I'm easy to bully? This series of attacks from the floor boss had stirred up Ron's temper. Although it had not inflicted any substantial damage, he gripped the greatsword with both hands and charged at ancient dragon Lanciax. His figure was like a cannonball, and borrowing the force brought by his dash, he swung the greatsword great fortune without hesitation, slashing viciously at the enormous monster's scaled hind leg. A sound like metal colliding rang out across the empty arena. The sharp edge of the greatsword struck the ancient dragon's thick scales, leaving only a wound from which blood slowly seeped. It had indeed dealt damage, but it was a bit like scratching an itch through armor. Meanwhile, the web between his thumb and index finger, gripping the greatsword, felt as though it had been torn apart. Ron raised his head and looked at ancient dragon before him. Only now did he finally realize that today's dungeon was not joking with him. This is bad. I really am easy to bully. At that very moment, in the passage of the floor guarded by the ancient dragon, sensing the intense trembling of the dungeon, the Loki Familia who had entered a state of vigilance under Captain Finn's warning arrived at the arena formed by the appearance of the floor boss. They did not continue forward. They all stopped in their tracks, because not far ahead stood the massive-bodied ancient dragon Lanciax, and currently challenging the floor boss was that adventurer party. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 145, Chapter 145, and so, he once again chooses to embrace the Lord of Blood. 1689 words. The surrounding dungeon environment is very strange. The only one who could call the captain by name was the vice-captain, Riveria. After sensing the intense tremor on the 12th floor, an ominous premonition had already shrouded her mind. Visible to the naked eye, the cave passages on the current floor had changed, clearly deviating from the map. There were no alternative routes to take, one could only follow the path beneath their feet all the way to its end. Looking back on the time she had spent in Rio, she had never encountered such a situation. Prepare for battle. Could the stabbing pain in his right thumb be related to the dungeon's anomaly? Finn frowned slightly. His gaze swept across the members of his familia. Perhaps because they were in the middle layers, their attitude had become somewhat lax. It was understandable. With their strength, they indeed wouldn't face threats in the upper layers. But no matter what, he had promised Lokian as the captain, his duty was to bring every member of the familia back safely to Rio. Finn reminded them, it seems we've encountered an abnormal phenomenon in the dungeon. I don't know if it's related to those minotaurs that escaped. Continue forward. Captain, is there really an abnormal phenomenon? Her short black hair was tied into two braids hanging beside her cheeks, and her uniquely sun-kissed Amazonian complexion gave Tiona Hiriut a fiery charm. She stepped barefoot on the ground. Compared to her older sister Tioni beside her, her chest appeared slightly flatter beneath the white wrapping. Holding her large twin blades, the girl stretched lazily. Probably something like that. The one who gave a concrete answer was Lafia, whose golden hair was tied into a single ponytail, her appearance quite delicate. Speaking her thoughts in front of so many familia members made her somewhat nervous. She lightly tugged at her sleeve, recalling her experience from some time ago. And that adventurer she had encountered in the dungeon, Ron. During the time she had been away on expedition, she wondered if his dungeon exploration had been going smoothly. Lafia, you know about this kind of situation? The current environmental changes in the dungeon, along with that intense trembling, were exactly the same as when they had encountered the goblin guard. It was definitely a dungeon anomaly. The elf girl did not mention that part of her experience she couldn't exactly say that she hadn't even faced the monster properly, and had briefly lost focus under the monster's battle cries, almost getting injured. And under the gaze of Captain Finn, and her teacher Riveria, Lafia nodded heavily. Before this expedition, I already experienced a dungeon abnormal phenomenon. But before the girl could elaborate further, Bet, the werewolf scouting ahead, relayed the information. Not far ahead, there's something resembling a floor boss's exclusive chamber. The exact situation hasn't been fully scouted yet. Do we want to take a look? A floor boss room appearing on the 12th floor. That combination of words felt extremely strange. Since the breeding ground had already appeared, there must inevitably be a floor boss ahead. After a brief moment of thought, Finn made a decisive choice. He nodded lightly. Move out. I'm quite curious why the dungeon has been frequently producing abnormal phenomena recently. As for the floor boss in this area, since we've encountered it, we'll deal with it along the way, so it doesn't trouble other adventurers. After that, they followed the path with no branches and arrived at an enormous, empty chamber comparable to Aurario's circular coliseum. Finn halted his steps, because not far ahead stood a colossal monster he had never seen before. The dragon's body was covered in pale white scales, as if it had endured an immensely long passage of time. Its size even surpassed that of middle-layer floor bosses. The two-headed dragon Amphisbaena. Behind it, four wings spread wide, and along its spine, red lightning continuously crackled. This thing. Is this really a floor boss that can appear in the upper layers? Even Finn, a level 6 adventurer, felt an unprecedented shock upon seeing the ancient dragon Lanciax before him. They hadn't actually fought yet. He couldn't determine its strength, but the visual impact alone was overwhelming. If he remembered correctly, the strongest monster that could appear in the upper layers was the rare infant dragon Ace had slain years ago. But compared to this, it was on an entirely different level. The red lightning dancing along the dragon's spine carried a distinct magical aura. Within that crimson lightning, there was even a scent of danger. Something's off. Even with a dungeon anomaly, a monster like this shouldn't be able to appear, right? A heavy sense of confusion enveloped the members of the Loki Familia. Even Riveria, of elven royalty, had no clear answer. Instead, she noticed in the distance ahead, adventurers were already fighting the colossal dragon. Compared to the large expedition party of the Loki Familia, there were only a handful of adventurers ahead, already engaged in the raid. Even with her brows slightly furrowed, Riveria's elegance remained undiminished. She reminded Bet, as well as Tiona and Tioni, who were eager to act, there's already an adventurer party engaging it. Let's wait. In dungeon exploration, this was an unwritten rule: when another party is already engaging a floor boss, unless they actively request assistance, others must avoid interfering midway. After hearing Riveria's warning, Bet snorted coldly but ultimately did not defy the order. He leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the battle ahead with a cold gaze. Then we wait. The previously restless members of the Loki Familia also restrained themselves, suppressing the curiosity in their eyes toward the special monster. However, this did not include Lafia. Even though the vast chamber was dimly lit, she could still vaguely make out the figure of the adventurer fighting the ancient dragon. It feels somewhat familiar. The elf girl frowned slightly. But as that adventurer turned to dodge, the sense of familiarity grew stronger, and Ron's refined face surfaced in her mind. Why is it you again? More importantly, why are both encounters in the dungeon tied to an abnormal phenomenon? Especially when she saw that, under the fierce attacks of the ancient dragon Lanciax, Ron could only barely evade. Lafia's mood grew inexplicably tense. Is this repaying the help he once gave me? She tightened her grip on her twin stick, fairy dust, preparing to assist. But when she raised her head, she met Riveria's puzzled gaze. Teacher Riveria, the adventurer fighting that dragon is my friend. I want to help him, that should be fine, right? Where did this girl even make such a friend? A trace of doubt flashed through Riveria's mind. But looking at the battlefield ahead, it was entirely a one-sided suppression by the dragon. She did not stop the girl. She nodded lightly. However, just as Lafia was about to assist, Bet moved even faster. Especially after hearing that the person was Lafia's friend. Lightning-like tattoos accentuated the arrogance on the silver-haired werewolf's already cold face. Holding his twin swords, dual Roland, he prepared to assist Ron, who was struggling in battle ahead. But unlike his usual disdain for other adventurers, Bet did not show contempt toward him. He was indeed struggling. Yet in the face of such an overwhelming gap in strength, the greatsword-wielding adventurer did not give up. Instead, he continued searching for opportunities. That alone made Lafia's friend better than those adventurers who had no drive to improve. Always picking trouble. Lafia, where did you find such a weak friend? The gray-haired werewolf said mercilessly, though his actions betrayed his true thoughts. But just as Bet was about to move, Finn, who had been observing all along, suddenly appeared in front of him. Meeting Bet's puzzled gaze, Finn shook his head with a serious expression. It's not time yet. With so many of us here, he still hasn't asked for help. That means this battle is still within his expectations. This is the path he chose. Don't interfere too much. Even if he really faces danger, we can still step in later. Just as Finn finished speaking, Ron, in the distance, once again nimbly dodged Lanciax's attack and pulled back to a safe distance. They had thought that he would ask for assistance next. But under the gaze of the Loki Familia members present, Ron planted his greatsword, Great Fortune, into the ground and drew out the short swords tied to his legs. Then with a ferocious expression on his handsome face, the short swords he gripped in both hands were not aimed at the floor boss but at his own abdomen. Without hesitation, he drove the blades into his body. Even Finn, Riveria, and Lafia, who had remained calm even before the ancient dragon Lanciax, now had their eyes shrink abruptly. That alone spoke volumes of their shock. What the hell is this guy doing? The defense of this ancient dragon's scales doesn't seem as overwhelming as expected. Then I'll use a quick assault tactic to take down this floor boss. The strength gap was enormous. The only solution Ron could think of now was to use the combat art of the Lord of Blood, combined with these two short swords, to rapidly build up a bleed effect. Strive to use the bleed status to completely slay the ancient dragon Lanciax. Having made his decision, he decisively cast healing magic from the tarnished template on himself, ensuring that his body wouldn't die outright after the self-inflicted wound. As for what came next, Ron gritted his teeth. With a ferocious expression, he plunged both short swords deeply into his abdomen without hesitation. Combat art seppuku. At the same time, Ron looked toward Daphne and Cassandra behind him, who were staring in shock. His voice was filled with cold resolve and a battle intent so fierce that even pain could not suppress it. Using the healing gourd to recover, his tone was resolute. Everyone, prepare yourselves. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/Tito Viller. Chapter 146, Chapter 146, A Crushing Battle. 12. Oh, for words, can this even be called fighting? Daphne, who had never encountered such a scene in the dungeon before, stared blankly into the distance at her captain, Ron, who was currently injuring himself. Her mouth hung open, yet she had no idea what to complain about. And the most bizarre thing of all was the calm reaction of fellow Familia member Yamato Mikoto, as if Ron's behavior was, in her eyes, something utterly ordinary. You'll get used to it. Seemingly guessing what Daphne was thinking, the black-haired girl suddenly felt a sense of veteran pride. She kept her tone as flat as possible, because the peculiarities Ron possessed were not limited to his insane fighting style. Rather, it was that method of revival, something Mikoto still couldn't make sense of even now. As if preparing her mentally in advance, she added casually, because there's something even more absurd. What did she mean? Something even more absurd. But Mikoto gave her no chance to press further. After a brief explanation, she sheathed her katana and fixed her gaze intently on the ancient dragon. Even a great sword couldn't break through its defenses. Forcing Ron to resort to a life-for-damage exchange like this, she quickly realized that in this battle, she could only assist through magic. She murmured softly, "I respectfully speak to you, my war god that can break through anything, lead me from the precious heaven. Give my petty body divine power of your grand body. Rescue them light of purification, sword of crushing evil. Sweep sword of suppression, sacred sword of conquest. It arrives here now by my order. Descend from heaven, rule the earth, Shinbutsuii." As the chant concluded, magic power gathered continuously between Mikoto's hands. A deep violet glow shone brilliantly as she expanded the spell's area to cover the dragon ahead. In an instant, a massive purple sword formed from magic lightly touched the ground, and a hexagram pattern spread across the surface, directly enveloping Lanciax. The already overwhelming effect of the spell became even more exaggerated after her adventurer level rose to LV. The ancient dragon, whose movements had been extremely swift, now found even the motion of its claws gradually slowing. Beneath the enormous creature, the ground began to fracture visibly, forming spiderweb-like cracks. Compared to the war game some time ago, Daphne had thought she had gained a basic understanding of her companion's strength, but now, it seemed she had been completely wrong. This was the true strength of the Hestia Familia. She didn't want to just stand by and do nothing in this battle. At the very least, she wanted to contribute to the team. But the gap in strength made it impossible for her to intervene at all. After all, her close friend Cassandra at least possessed healing magic and could act as support. But what about herself? Daphne looked toward the distance ahead. Ron had already pulled the two short swords out of his abdomen. Perhaps due to absorbing blood, those weapons now emitted a sinister crimson glow. Then, like a cannonball, he shot forward toward the ancient dragon, launching a fierce assault. Compared to his initial probing against the floor boss, once he truly committed to battle, the speed Ron unleashed was terrifying. Even under Mikoto's gravity magic, Futsunamatama, his speed showed no sign of decreasing. Instead, the pain stimulating his body caused his adrenaline to surge, keeping his mind in a state of extreme focus. Even if it's just scratching you, I'll still scrape you to death, little by little. That was Ron's current mindset. Given the ever-increasing difficulty of this Souls-like dungeon, encountering a normal floor boss and defeating it step by step to earn a great feat was completely impossible for him now. Everything was hell difficulty. Just within the connected layer of the first death line, encountering an ancient dragon like Lanciax, he didn't even dare imagine how difficult future exploration would become. So he had to cherish every opportunity to earn a great feat. Most importantly, after raising the tarnished template to LV. 3. The enhancement it brought was access to equipment that simply shouldn't exist in the DanMachi world, a sacred seal. An indispensable item for casting incantations. If I can obtain the incantation Ash of War from the ancient dragon Lanciax, I can't even imagine how much it would boost my strength. With that thought, Ron stepped directly into the gravity field of Futsunamatama. The most immediate sensation was that his internal organs were being compressed and shifted under the pressure. Even his bones began to creak under the influence of the magic. But you're right. What Souls players are best at is adapting to the environment. The mountain-like body of the ancient dragon Lanciax was likewise subjected to the pressure of the gravity field, even restricting its ability to fly. An epic-level debuff. A dragon that couldn't fly was the perfect target. Gradually adapting to the discomfort of the high-gravity environment, Ron gritted his teeth and decisively charged toward the distant floor boss, whose movements had slowed. He didn't rely on technique. Instead, he entrusted his combat method entirely to the abnormal bleed effect granted by combat art, seppuku. SHHK. With each swing of his blade, only fleeting flashes of sword light could be seen, but the damage inflicted on the monster was real, sharp edges slicing through the dragon's scales. Thanks to the mobility he had gained after adapting, Ron's attack frequency was extremely high. Each strike left small wounds on Lanciax's body, none fatal in the short term. But the bleed effect attached to his attacks effectively suppressed the dragon's powerful regenerative ability. As countless wounds were torn open by the short swords, blood began to gush out continuously. Bit by bit, given enough time, even ants could gnaw an elephant to death. Not to mention, with 2 uses of revival, Ron had a massive margin for error, and had no fear of death at all. As Lanciax roared, the accumulating pain turned its crimson eyes into pure fury, at being provoked by what it saw as an insect. Enduring the gravity magic. The ancient dragon slowly rose. The red lightning that had once flickered along its spine suddenly became restrained. Raising its sharp claw high, it began to guide the energy. The lightning, that had previously dissipated, now gradually gathered into its claw. The once chaotic red arcs stabilized, ultimately forming a sharp weapon, a lightning and fire sword. A violently oppressive aura instantly filled the arena. It had abandoned any intention of tormenting the adventurers, it only wanted to tear them all apart. A deafening roar surged with immense power. Yet just as Lanciax prepared to strike again, Ron made no attempt to evade. Instead, he stepped onto the floor boss's body, relying purely on his raw stats to ignore the effects of Futsunamitama's gravity magic, launching a rapid assault toward the dragon's relatively vulnerable abdomen. But before Ron could savor the battle, what followed immediately was the Crimson Lightning Greatsword, condensed in Lanciax's claw, being hurled directly toward him. A fully covering barrage of deathly lightning strikes, unleashed through the shattered ground. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 147, Chapter 147, This guy is more like a monster than a monster. 1227 words. Is this suicide? Or is this a fight? What kind of adventurer? When facing an overwhelmingly powerful monster they cannot defeat, instead of seeking help from other adventurers, would raise a short sword and stab themselves in both sides. Finn couldn't understand it. Nor could the members of the Loki familia present. They only found the scene utterly incomprehensible. It should be a skill that adventurer possesses. At the very least, from that earlier fight with the dragon, it's clear this guy is definitely not a rookie adventurer. The one who reached that conclusion was the 9 Hell Reveria. By exchanging injury for damage, he was managing to inflict slight harm on that massive monster that should have been impossible to shake. But would this really have any effect? She remained doubtful. Still, noticing Lafia's worried expression, the ice-cold elf ultimately did not want to see her disciple suffer inwardly. The dungeon is showing abnormal conditions. No matter what caused it, we have a duty to resolve it and prevent it from threatening the lives of other passing adventurers. At that moment when the ancient dragon, which had been toying with its prey, was thoroughly enraged by Ron, who was like a mere mosquito, biting it, the floor boss no longer held back. Lightning and flame condensed along its claw into a blade. Even from a distance Reveria, as a mage, could feel the immense power contained within it, and her eyes gradually widened. There was no trace of magical energy flowing through the air of the arena. It should be a method unique to the ancient dragon Lanciax. Even as a level 6 adventurer, she could still feel a powerful threat from the attack the floor boss was gathering. Just as she was about to use magic to intervene in the battlefield ahead to buy time for Retreatron's actions, exceeded the expectations of every adventurer present. He did not choose to evade. Instead, with astonishing agility, he stepped onto the massive body of the ancient dragon, weaving through it with nimble movements. Even his target was the lightning flame blade the floor boss was charging. Not only did he not avoid it, he rushed toward it like a moth drawn to fire in the dead of night. This guy. Seeing Ron's reckless move, even the werewolf bet couldn't help but click his tongue. His usually cold gaze tightened sharply, his pupils contracting at the sight of that adventurer's actions. He was just about to move, but in the next moment, facing the lightning blade condensed by the ancient dragon Lanciax, Ron seemed to have anticipated it. He raised his short sword in advance and performed a parry. The attack had not yet fully charged. When it met Ron's extremely precise interception with the short sword, the sudden disruption caused the already unstable lightning to explode instantly on the spot. A crimson glow briefly illuminated the dim floor boss chamber. At the center of the explosion, the arm of the ancient dragon Lanciax was completely blown off. But Ron, holding a metal weapon, was likewise inevitably caught in the blast. As the smoke cleared, the young figure who landed steadily on the ground had not fallen. Only, at a glance, his charred black skin made him look especially miserable. But to an ordinary adventurer, such injuries would have long been fatal. For Ron, whose endurance attribute was maxed out, it was merely a trivial fatal wound. So lightning blades produced by incantations can't be parried, huh? He raised a hand and wiped his scorched face. The so-called injuries had already been completely healed by the healing gourd. And that was under sudden circumstances already the limit of what he could achieve. Compared to the full-area lethal lightning strike, interrupting the ancient dragon Lanciax's channeling with a parry was the optimal solution his body instinctively chose in that moment of crisis. He hadn't died outright. Instead, by trading injury for injury, he had blown off the creature's arm. Battle analysis would have to wait until after it was over. After wiping away the ash that obstructed his vision, Ron faced the ancient dragon's clawed sweeping strike and decisively rolled into the monster's blind spot at its flank. But before he could steady himself, the enraged ancient dragon Lanciax launched another pursuit. She no longer used her lightning magic. That ferocious dragon head was now continuously gathering crimson flames capable of burning everything. Finally, a fan-shaped pillar of blazing fire, carrying scorching heat, evaporated the moisture in the air. The erupting flames lit up the arena as they surged toward Ron. Thanks a lot. This was undoubtedly the most troublesome monster Ron had encountered in the dungeon. The combat methods possessed by the ancient dragon Lanciax even surpassed those of most adventurers. And faced with that unavoidable wave of flame, he clenched his teeth. Before the fire engulfed him, he raised his arm, power within. No chanting was required. A pale yellow glow formed a barrier that absorbed the flames, completely taking in this round of the floor boss's attack, but the effect of the skill did not end there. Visible to the naked eye, the flames spread along Ron's arm, until they covered his entire body, as though he had thrown himself into the embrace of the frenzied flame. Absorbed flames temporarily increased strength and endurance. He felt the temporary boost in his physical attributes. But the cost was flames that enveloped his entire body, impossible to extinguish, burning his flesh at every moment, even his soul not spared. Even breathing was accompanied by piercing pain. And then, right before everyone's eyes, Ron, his entire body engulfed in raging flames, did not pause his advance because of his severe injuries. Instead, in that desperate situation, he unleashed even greater power. Freed from the constraints of the gravity magic, Futsunamatama, the boy fully exploited his agility, pushing hit-and-run tactics to the extreme. Each brief pause, what awaited the ancient dragon Lanciax was only crimson sword light interwoven with flames, tearing through the monster's pale scales, blood gushing continuously from countless wounds. The monster's roar echoed through the vast floor boss chamber. Perhaps the scene was too shocking. To Finn and Riveria, the battle felt unbearably long. But without exception, their complex gazes never left Ron for even a moment. I feel like this guy looks more like a monster than that dragon does. Not to mention ordinary adventurers, even those who had already carved out their own path in this profession. Was there really anyone who could reach Ron's level of absurdity? He endured the attacks of a mutated floor boss head-on. Even as his body burned with raging flames, as though he could turn to ash at any moment and vanish in this vastly unequal battle, he still did not retreat. Searching for that incredibly slim chance of victory. Not only that, when Ron's sword light, like a torrential downpour, fell densely upon the ancient dragon Lanciax, the hemorrhage status effect accumulated to its limit. At that moment, the floor boss could no longer be described as merely bleeding profusely. Its massive body was like shattered porcelain, no longer able to sustain life, collapsing to the ground with a thunderous crash. It's over just like that. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon. com/Titoviller, Chapter 148, Chapter 148, What Can I Say? 1746 words, soul shards plus 50, only after the massive body of the ancient dragon Lanciax turned into black dust and dissipated, leaving behind only the final condensed magic stone, and drops as proof of its existence. This trial into the mid-floors was finally cleared, after Ron had frequently switched character save slots, used every last trump card at his disposal, and combined it with Mikoto's Futsunamatama magic. The raid was fully cleared. As for the price paid, there was no need to say more. Ron looked at the flames covering his entire body. Through the power within sorcery of the Ashen One template, he had absorbed all of Lanciax's dragon flame. His strength and durability had both clearly increased. But overly powerful strength will erode one's own life force. Precisely because of this, such power remains hidden. There was not the slightest sign of the flames extinguishing. Perhaps because the power contained within the dragon flame was extremely great, it had not burned away the clothes Ron was wearing. These flames even had no temperature. Yet the damage to body and soul was beyond imagination. When the adrenaline completely faded, the pain like a parasite clinging to bone made Ron bite through his lip, yet he still could not suppress it effectively. He did not sit and wait for death. Healing gourd, but even when the uses were consumed down to 1/3, it had no effect whatsoever on the backlash of the sorcery. So getting stronger really does come at a cost. If he took off his clothes, Ron didn't even need to guess he'd basically be cosplaying that club-wielding hero from his previous life in the DanMachi world. Only, compared to that guy, he really did have a burning club. But he couldn't feel happy at all. The side effect of the power within sorcery was that it continuously consumed his life force, and the most direct manifestation of that was his fingers beginning to carbonize. Although he could still move, Ron knew clearly that he didn't have much time left. He felt no fear toward the approaching death. After all, he still had 2 chances of revival. What he wanted to know more was, after paying such a terrible price, what kind of rewards would he get? Enduring the pain, even breathing felt like a luxury. But when he saw the gray-brown scales and the ancient dragon's reverse scale dropped after killing Lanciax, the precious revival uses had not been wasted. Minimum guaranteed return secured. Ron's originally terrible mood finally eased a little. He looked ahead at that pale yellow glow that only he could see. He bent down with difficulty and reached out a finger to touch it. Dragon flame. Thunderfire sword, death lightning, Lanciax's blade, but this Thunderfire sword, why does it look kind of weird? Combined with the sacred seal obtained from upgrading the tarnished save to LV3, the drawback of only being able to fight in close quarters at this stage was effectively resolved. The diversification of combat methods, whether in dungeon exploration or adventurer battles, would play a decisive role in determining victory. The ancient dragon faith incantations and ashes of war that had dropped completely dispelled the few remaining shadows in Ron's heart. Looking again at his carbonized hands, he no longer had any regrets. The speed at which the flames burned away his life force was gradually increasing. He tried to move his ankle, but even such a simple action was an impossible luxury. It felt like he was about to recreate, in another world, the sensation of his idol being burned to ashes. What can I say? Mamba out. Still, Ron only hoped that death would come faster, so that at least he wouldn't have to endure this bone-deep agony in both body and mind. In this battle, Daphne and Cassandra, who had not played a particularly large role, had nothing in their eyes now but shock and disbelief from the bottom of their hearts. It was over. Completely over. Facing the high-intensity assault of the ancient dragon Lanciax, Ron had not only neutralized the floor boss's Thunderfire sword attack in what had been a certain death situation, he had even resolved the scorching dragon flame spewed from the dragon's head using special means, erupting with unprecedented power in the face of despair. The dense sword flashes and the floor boss, whose body could no longer bear the strain, exploding from the inside out. The sheer volume of information left Daphne's mind blank, yet she clearly realized this was Ron's true strength. This guy is the real monster. Her gaze was vacant as she muttered. She did not notice that the timid girl standing beside her, Cassandra, was looking at Ron, whose entire body was engulfed in flames, with fear and concern in her eyes. Without a doubt at this moment, the captain overlapped with the adventurer in her dream, before the war game, the one whose entire body had been burning in flames. What she feared was that after this battle ended, the flames on Ron's body showed no sign of fading. Ignoring her close friend beside her, the usually soft-natured girl finally made a decision. Cassandra gripped her staff with both hands and quickened her steps toward Ron. Although she had only spent a short time with him still. As someone who believed in her, Ron held a special, almost redemptive place in her heart. As the distance closed when she clearly saw Ron's hands, burned by flames into pitch-black charcoal, Cassandra felt as though her heart had been tightly clenched. Suffocating. The intense suffocation made it hard for her to breathe. Without caring about appearances, she looked at the boy slumped on the ground, quietly waiting for death. Cassandra dropped to her knees behind him. She knew what she had to do now. Take on the role of a healer. At such a critical moment, she had to remain calm, but as she chanted, it wavered just like the flames on Ron's body, sometimes surging, sometimes fading, her voice unsteady. Heavenly light, once rejected. Merciful arms that save my shallow self. Rescue my miserable companions in place of my words that cannot reach them. O sunlight, may you beat back ruin. A gentle white light appeared in Cassandra's hands. As for that strange flame, she paid no mind to whether it would burn her hands. However, the moment her arms made contact, she felt no temperature from the flames at all. Likewise, the healing magic she possessed so light had no effect whatsoever. It could not stop the burning of the flames. What exactly is going on? Confusion, self-blame, all kinds of complex emotions enveloped Cassandra. She was like a child who had failed to meet expectations, at a complete loss. Perhaps the output wasn't strong enough. The girl did not give up. She repeatedly used her healing magic, even though it placed an unprecedented burden on her mind. Her eyes filled with anxiety. Why isn't my healing magic working? Don't waste your magic. Power within. The side effects of the sorcery became even more pronounced when the body was weakened. Sitting slumped on the ground, his body had grown stiff. Even his hearing had been affected. Sensing that Cassandra behind him was continuously casting spells, Ron wanted to turn his neck, but he couldn't. With so much experience exploring souls-like dungeons, death had long since become routine for him. After all, he could just win the rematch after revival. But if this continues, you'll definitely die. Hearing Ron's hoarse, torn voice, Cassandra felt no relief. Even her tone carried a faint sob. And then Daphne arrived at the scene. Seeing such a tragic sight with her own eyes, she opened her mouth, but for a long while did not know how to express what she felt. From their earlier exchange she knew Cassandra's magic had no effect. Then what could they do? Daphne took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself. If healing had no effect, it was likely because Cassandra's magic wasn't strong enough. A panacea. Or the saint of the battlefield, Ermid, at the White Sanatorium. She could definitely do it. The fastest one present was LV3 Mikoto. Daphne decisively turned to the black-haired girl from the Far East, and was about to speak, but what she saw was her calm expression. As if Ron's life or death had nothing to do with her. A helpless fury nearly consumed Daphne. They were companions of the same familia. How could she watch their captain die with such indifference? You're faster. Go to Ora Rio and find Ermid. There might still be time. From their time recently fighting together in the dungeon, Mikoto understood for Ron, death was as ordinary as eating and drinking. In future explorations this secret would naturally become known to the others. Rather than that, she might as well use this opportunity to dispel their doubts with facts, since Daphne and Cassandra's concern was genuine. Thinking of this, the girl shook her head lightly. This ability, no matter how one thought about it, was impossible to understand, and her tone grew complicated. No need to worry. She carefully chose her words. This is complicated. You probably wouldn't believe it even if I explained it, but... For him, but before Mikoto could finish she noticed footsteps approaching from afar and turned her head. When she saw the Loki familia and that single ponytailed elf rushing over her, unfinished words were stuck in her throat. The Loki familia, why were they here? Noticing Ron's miserable state, Lefia's light purple pupils suddenly shrank. She scanned the surroundings, sensing the heavy atmosphere and the complicated expressions of Daphne and Cassandra. A chill struck her heart. Looking carefully, she saw Ron's nearly fully carbonized body, and the words of concern never even left her mouth. Why had it become like this? Looking into Ron's eyes, she could see his vitality rapidly fading. This guy was her friend. He was someone who had pushed her away without hesitation when monsters attacked her. Could she really just watch him die? Absolutely not. The elf girl felt her arms trembling slightly as she turned toward Riveria. Teacher. The panacea, I need the panacea. As for the cost, just deduct it from this expedition. He can't hold on much longer. Why would he run into Lefia and the Loki familia in the dungeon? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 149, Chapter 149, Ron, kids, I'm back. 1905 words. The emotion known as self-reproach enveloped Lefia's heart. Even though she had already arrived at the scene, she had not provided any help to this battle. And even she had to personally witness Ron's death. Such a thing this elven girl would absolutely not allow it to happen. Since so-called healing magic had no effect, then she would use something even more expensive, a panacea. Participating in a familia expedition, she knew that this rare and costly panacea was managed by her teacher, Riveria. So Lefia did not hesitate to seek her help. This kind of rare resource, using it on Ron, a member of another familia, was indeed against the rules. Then she would use her own expedition earnings to make an emergency purchase from Riveria. What kind of bizarre development is this? Ron really wanted to curse. It wasn't because of the chatterbox elf Lefia, rather, it was because the arrival of the Loki familia at the scene had completely disrupted all his plans. After all, this was a Souls-like dungeon. Trying to completely avoid death and speedrun it in one go was simply impossible. Since the side effects of power within could not be eliminated, and Daphne and Cassandra were both trustworthy, then he might as well die cleanly and decisively. That way, he wouldn't have to explain anything later. But what Ron never expected was that the Loki familia, having just finished their dungeon expedition, would coincidentally appear on the 12th floor. Setting aside the fact that they witnessed the battle at most, it just made things feel a bit insane. But the unique nature of the revival skill, that was the secret he absolutely needed to keep hidden. It wasn't to the point that adventurers in Rio would dissect him for research. But if it were exposed, there would definitely be unexpected trouble. He looked at the elven girl crouching before him, who made no effort to hide the worry in her expression. There was a trace of comfort in his heart, but his eyes were filled with despair. Not because he feared death, but because the flames of power within had already burned his vocal cords to the point where he couldn't make a sound. Otherwise, all he wanted to do was have Mikoto and Daphne take him away. And then, as if she understood the despair in the boy's eyes, the responsibility to save him made Lefia even more resolute. She raised her head again, her gaze sweeping across the Loki familia members who usually took care of her. Her tone was urgent. I really have a reason. I absolutely must save him. As Lefia's friends, for her to go this far, their relationship must be very deep. But looking at the boy whose body was nearly burned into charcoal, flames covering him, panacea, even though that kind of potion possessed powerful healing properties, for Ron's current condition. Riveria truly didn't want to crush Lefia's hopes, but she knew very clearly he couldn't be saved. It would have no effect at all. It was also a way to prevent Lefia from falling deeper into self-blame. She frowned slightly, took out a bottle of potion from her medicine box, and said seriously, "What we need to consider now is how to extinguish these flames. I suspect they were caused by the fire breath of that giant dragon." These flames, even for Riveria, they felt unprecedentedly strange. They emitted no heat. They hadn't even burned away Ron's clothes completely. Instead, they were targeting his body directly. That gradually carbonizing body was proof enough. The only thing she could think of was that ancient dragon that had spewed flames. Though she was reluctant to admit it, she felt fortunate that her familia hadn't intervened. Because with even a slight misstep facing these bizarre flames, they might have suffered casualties here. Healing magic has no effect at all. I can't even feel the temperature of the flames. It's as if they're specifically targeting Ron. The Loki familia's fame, there wasn't an adventurer who didn't know it. Especially with all of its members gathered here. Cassandra seemed to have found her last hope. She raised her head, her pleading gaze sweeping across Finn and Riveria. Please help Captain Ron. We'll do what we can. In the end, they couldn't bear to watch a life fade away before their eyes. Riveria did not avoid Cassandra's plea. Holding her ultraspec staff embedded with 9 top-grade magic stones, she frowned slightly. 9 hell. The reason she bore that title was because her magic could take on different forms. The solution she could think of now was to use the first stage of her magic, Winfimblevetre, to completely freeze Ron. Hoping that through magical interference, the strange flames could be extinguished. As for the consequences, even if he were saved, his already carbonized limbs would most likely mean the end of his adventurer career. But as long as he could live, that was enough. Harbinger of the end, the white snow. Blow with the wind before the twilight. Closing light, the freezing land. Blizzard, the 3 severe winters. My name is Alf. Riveria's control over her magic was exquisite. A blizzard-carrying chilling cold enveloped Ron completely. He wasn't frozen into a block of ice, only a thin layer of frost formed over his surface. And then an extremely bizarre scene appeared before everyone's eyes. Even though his body had been completely frozen, the flames consuming his life, not only were they not extinguished, they were actually intensified. Silence. All the adventurers present, including Riveria, fell into brief silence. The one who broke the silence was Bet, arms crossed, expression cold. He turned his head away, not looking at Ron's miserable state. That would be disrespect to the dying. Having witnessed the battle just now, the strength Ron displayed was absolutely close to that of a level 4 adventurer. At his age, he was unquestionably a genius. Bet hated the weak. But objectively speaking, facing the overwhelmingly powerful mutated floor boss dragon, Lanciax, even knowing he had no chance of victory, he showed no hesitation. He endured multiple attacks, used unimaginable methods, and ultimately blew that massive monster to death. Just that alone made him better than many adventurers in Ora Rio. Being able to face death calmly, and fight to create a chance for his companions to survive honestly. If Ron were still alive, and still Lafia's friend, it might be worth having a drink with him sometime. Facing the gazes of Daphne and Cassandra, Bet turned his head, his tone indifferent. There's no need to keep struggling. Let him die with dignity. That's the last respect we can give him. His strength was decent. A bit stupid. Even though the Loki familia was nearby, he still chose to resolve the battle in his own way. Bet couldn't quite understand Ron's thinking. But that was also the reason he held him in high regard. The reality was already laid bare. An oppressive atmosphere hung over everyone present. Even the Loki familia, though they were merely passers-by, they understood Ron's battle. He hadn't died due to conflict between adventurers, but because of an abnormal event in the dungeon. He faced the monsters head-on and died. Not because he was weak. In fact, his strength surpassed some of their own members. Thank you for your help. Ron's secret absolutely could not be exposed here. But he would inevitably continue to be active in Ora Rio in the future. As for how to explain things, even Mikoto hadn't figured it out yet. She looked at the flames on Ron's body, gradually weakening. It was time. She raised her head, her expression calm, and said to Finn and Riveria, "We'll handle the rest. Seniors, we won't take up more of your time. Damn this abnormal dungeon incident." As fellow adventurers, seeing a junior burned into charcoal right before their eyes. Finn couldn't help but feel something. After all, people had hearts of flesh. If they hadn't come here, that mutated floor boss dragon would have caused even more adventurers to perish. But Ron's appearance prevented that from happening. We've finished our expedition and are preparing to return to Rio. I'm sorry that we weren't able to help Ron when he needed it. Looking at Lafia, whose face was filled with dazed regret, Finn shook his head gently. Perhaps Ron's intention had always been to kill that dragon. But the final result benefited all adventurers. Just that alone earned his respect. The blonde boy suggested, "It's not appropriate to bury him here. Come back to Rio with us." "That's right. You're not in a condition to keep exploring anyway. It's safer to return with us." Setting aside familia affiliations, someone who sacrifices his life to protect his companions deserves at least a bouquet at his grave. What if Ron revived halfway through? Facing the goodwill from Finn and the Loki familia, under normal circumstances, Mikoto would be grateful, but now, she only felt overwhelmed. Fortunately, she didn't need to think at all. Because as the layer of frost covering Ron's body gradually melted, even the flames burning his life began to visibly weaken. It wasn't because they had been dealt with. Every adventurer present could feel it, that faint, nearly imperceptible breathing, and the heart that had already stopped beating both pointed to one fact: death. It was about to claim the young boy before their eyes. This guy, he was probably around the same age as Ace. Yet he withered away right in front of them. Even Bet couldn't help but turn his head. They all understood, as long as one explored the dungeon, death was always a risk. If one wanted to survive and return safely, the only way was to become stronger. Finn did not help Lafia up from where she sat collapsed on the ground. He looked at the dazed Daphne and Cassandra, shook his head slightly, and spoke in a complicated tone. "The outcome can no longer be changed. My condolences." Why were her eyes blurry? Lafia couldn't understand. Perhaps it was because a friend who had once saved her was dying before her eyes, and she was powerless to do anything. The elven girl raised her head. Ron's completely charred body became increasingly blurred in her vision. Her emotions were complicated, she didn't know what to say. But then a soft, gentle light enveloped the boy lying on the ground. Immediately after, fine cracks began to appear in the carbonized layer on Ron's body. Along with it, a strong, powerful heartbeat echoed from his chest. The dark, burnt layer peeled off like old paint, replaced by smooth, fair skin reborn anew. His consciousness had long fallen into unconsciousness. He had no idea how much time had passed. And Ron didn't want, after reviving, to see his companions immersed in such grief. So when the revival skill successfully activated, he suddenly sprang up from the ground, brushed away the ashes blocking his vision, and spoke in an unprecedentedly relaxed tone, "Kids, I'm back." And then Ron noticed it. Daphne, Cassandra and Finn, Riveria, and the others from the Loki familia all staring at him with eyes wide in shock. Looks like he revived at the wrong time. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 150, Chapter 150. Not only were the questions left unanswered, the mysteries only deepened. 1256 words. The atmosphere at the scene did not become joyful upon witnessing Ron's revival. Instead, after personally seeing this bizarre spectacle, it fell completely into silence. Even Riveria, Finn, and the others unconsciously took half a step back. Because this scene was simply far too eerie. Those flames, which could not be extinguished even by magic, blocked all healing effects, and visible to the naked eye, had already burned Ron's limbs into charred black carbon. Completely devoid of life. And then, when a pure white light enveloped his body, it was as if the situation had reversed. The carbonized layer gradually shattered into countless fragments. Fresh, pale skin emerged anew, as though none of it had ever happened. What exactly is going on? If one were to rank by age as a member of the royal elven lineage, Riveria was unquestionably a veteran. Yet even she had never seen a dead person revive in such a short time. After all, when a person is killed, they die. Adventurers are no exception. This is the fundamental logic of the world. If Ron hadn't shown any bodily abnormalities, she would have already started to suspect, was this guy something like those creatures from the deep floors? Coming back from the dead. Could such an utterly unreasonable ability really appear on an adventurer? This kind of question was something Ron could easily answer. Mainly because he hadn't expected that, after enduring that long purely through willpower, the members of the Loki Familia still hadn't left. So he could only shift his gaze toward Lafia, who looked absent-minded and gradually turned incredulous. With a relaxed tone, he broke the stalemate. "Miss Lafia, what a coincidence. I didn't expect we'd run into each other again in the dungeon." "It is quite a coincidence." The elven girl's emotions were like a drop-tower ride. Just moments ago, she had been filled with guilt for failing to do what she should have done, but in the blink of an eye, Ron was standing before her completely unharmed. After getting up from the ground as if trying to confirm the thought deep in her mind, she didn't care about the gazes of her familiar companions. She lightly stood on tiptoe and reached out to pinch the boy's cheek. It had elasticity. More importantly, it was warm. The overwhelming flood of information left Lafia at a loss for how to describe her feelings. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with relief. "You're still alive." "Of course. This lousy dungeon doesn't have the qualifications to kill me." Fortunately, she didn't ask about the specifics of his abilities. Ron chuckled lightly, shook his head, and turned his gaze toward the bewildered Cassandra, as well as Daphne, whose expression had become especially complicated, as if she had realized the truth of the situation. Before he could ask, Daphne spoke first, explaining, "Captain Ron, right after you killed the dragon, the seniors from the Loki Familia arrived on this floor. They wanted to help you deal with your physical condition. Especially your friend here." Setting aside the very small number of Evelus and those rotten to the core adventurers at the very least, when it comes to exploring the dungeon and conquering floor bosses, all adventurers share the same goal. After learning the full story out of goodwill from the Loki Familia, Ron did not hold back his verbal thanks. Looking around at everyone present, what he received in return were only complicated gazes. "Thank you all for your help, especially Lafia. If there's a chance in the future, I hope I can properly thank you all on a formal occasion." He directly avoided the topic of coming back from the dead. But after all, it involved an adventurer's privacy. Skills, magic, and ability values unless within the same familia were never disclosed. To ask directly. Being the captain of the Loki Familia, Finn relied not only on strength, but also on his ability to command, coordinate, and manage diplomatic relations with other familias. In a situation like this, he knew that asking directly would be extremely rude. But having personally witnessed such a miracle, suppressing his curiosity was absolutely impossible, especially since he was Lafia's friend. Looking somewhat youthful, the blonde Paolum boy gently shook his head. "We're all adventurers. Helping each other in dangerous situations is only natural. Besides, you're Lafia's friend, and this was also an abnormal dungeon situation. To be precise, we should have fought together. But I saw that you seemed confident in handling it, so I didn't have my familia members intervene. To avoid disrupting your battle plan. A dragon never seen before." Ron's incomprehensible fighting style, along with all sorts of unusual methods. Yet he had never heard this person's name anywhere in Ora Rio. In Finn's blue eyes, there was a clear sense of inquiry. "Thank you." Even after all that was said, Ron still expressed his gratitude to the LV-6 adventurer known as the braver Finn. Fortunately, they hadn't interfered in the battle. Otherwise, given the strength of the Loki Familia's adventurers, when facing this LV-4 ancient dragon Lanciax, he might not have had the chance to land the finishing blow and secure the kill. As for what came next, having witnessed his death firsthand, the timid Cassandra clearly bore the psychological shadow left by Souls-like level difficulty. At this stage, it was not suitable to continue exploring deeper. Thinking of this, Ron's gaze swept over Riveria, the green-haired elf, as well as the Amazon twins, Tiona and her sister. As for whether this battle would bring future consequences, he no longer had the mind to judge. Senior Finn will be withdrawing from the dungeon for now. After all, this battle has had quite a significant impact on our familia's overall condition. All the doubts were ultimately left unspoken. The goal was the same, yet no invitation to travel together was extended. The meaning behind that needed no guessing. Finn, Riveria and the others could only watch as Ron's group packed up the drops and left along the gradually regenerating tunnel of the dungeon. And among everyone present, the one who felt the most relieved was undoubtedly the golden-haired elf girl, whose tense nerves finally relaxed after confirming that Ron was unharmed. She let out a long breath of relief. However, what awaited Lafia next was Finn's completely undisguised, eager gaze. From the battle just now, Ron's strength had at least reached the level of LV. Yet Finn had never heard of him in Rio. Considering Lafia came from the school district, could it be that Ron was also an adventurer who had left the school district to develop in Rio? The blonde boy hesitated briefly before ultimately choosing to ask directly, "About your friend, would it be convenient for you to tell us a bit about him?" She knew this was coming. But her encounter with Ron had never involved Familius. Even now, Lafia only knew his name. She didn't even know which familia he belonged to. Faced with Captain Finn's routine inquiry, the elven girl thought for a moment, recalling their first meeting, and did not hide anything. His name is Ron. He's a friend I met before setting out on the dungeon expedition. I don't know which familia he belongs to, but speaking of it, it's quite a coincidence. That day, when I met Mr. Ron, I also encountered an abnormal dungeon event. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 151. Chapter 151, Finn has a question. What exactly is Ron? 1461 words. What's the exact situation? It's hard for me to explain it clearly to you, too. You can roughly understand it as this: the magic I possess is very special. When I'm on the verge of death, it heals me. And then, because of that magic, I'm hated by the dungeon, and from time to time it can trigger the occurrence of an abnormal situation. Considering they were all members of the same familia, Ron chose to give a simple answer. When they had encountered the ancient dragon Lanciax, Daphne and Cassandra had not backed down, especially the latter, even when she herself had suffered backlash from ashen sorcery. Even though the healing had no effect, she had still done everything she could. At the very least, for now, these two new members recruited into the Hestia Familia were worthy of Ron's trust as they headed into the middle floors to explore the Souls-like dungeon. This kind of situation was unavoidable. Even for old-school ASS Souls-like players, it was fundamentally impossible to clear everything without dying even once. And after hearing Ron's explanation, the countless doubts in Daphne's heart finally received an answer that made logical sense. Reasonable. After all, the unknowns on an adventurer's body were things even gods might not be able to fully understand. Possessing powerful magic and being hated by the dungeon was something she could accept. She looked once more at the Far East girl whose expression remained calm and undisturbed. Because there's something even more outrageous. Now she could understand why, when Ron had been on the verge of death, she had not seen even the slightest anxiety on Mikoto's face, nor any emotional disturbance at all. So this girl had already gotten used to this kind of absurd stunt, had she? Daphne tugged at the corner of her mouth. The fact that he could speak so plainly about a secret of this level let her feel the trust behind Ron's attitude. Her tone was full of helplessness. At the very least, before we started exploring the dungeon, you should have explained the situation in advance. Just now, Cassandra, she was really worried about your safety. If I'd told you, would you have believed it? The brown-haired girl gently shook her head. If the facts had not been laid out right in front of her, she absolutely would never have believed that this kind of miracle, never before seen in Rio, could appear in an adventurer. She could also understand why Ron did not want to expand the size of his familia. A special magic like this, she dared not imagine what it would mean on a worldwide scale, but it would definitely cause a sensation in Rio. And that guy was her captain. And in the face of the miracle of dying and coming back to life, what had been naturally overlooked were the details of Ron's battle with the ancient dragon Lanciax. The complicated look on Daphne's face had already betrayed the thoughts deep in her mind. Compared with the boy who had dueled Hyacinthos in the war game, it was hard to imagine that the one who had explored the dungeon with them today was the same adventurer. It wasn't exactly painful to watch. It was just an absurd feeling that was hard to describe. If you wanted to kill a monster, you had to cut the monster with your weapon, not disembowel yourself before the fight. She had seen Lanciax's regenerative ability and defensive power with her own eyes. Even with a greatsword in hand, Ron had only been able to leave shallow wounds, and even the bleeding injuries had healed at high speed. On the other hand, after Ron had performed seppuku with those two short swords, that strange crimson aura made Daphne's heart pound violently every time she recalled the scene. It was obviously a blitzkrieg tactic. He had inflicted dense, unrecoverable wounds across the floor boss's enormous body, and in the end had detonated it completely from within, bringing the ancient dragon's life to an end. That pale yellow magical barrier that could completely absorb the ancient dragon's flames. The way Ron's strength had been temporarily enhanced after flames spread across his body, and so on. Her heart was full of confusion, and even now, she could not obtain any concrete answers. Looking ahead, at the figure carrying a great sword on his back and dragging along the ancient dragon's drop items - captain. Daphne's eyes were complicated. Why does it feel like the secrets you carry are even more outrageous? On the matter of our captain being a monster. They had run into each other twice in a row. Both times, it had been in the middle of abnormal situations that had coincidentally happened in the dungeon. Anyone with even a little bit of brains could realize how much information was hidden inside that. As the captain of the Loki Familia, Finn did not think he had any defects in his intelligence. It was very likely that all of this was because of the adventurer Ron, but even thinking that was hard to believe. An adventurer. Abnormal situations in the dungeon. He found it difficult to connect those two things, but after personally witnessing Ron's revival from near death, was the so-called impossible merely something he had never encountered before? There had been no frank explanation. The blonde boy cast a complicated glance at Riveria. A steadiness that did not match that youthful face now appeared on Finn's own features. Do you think there are really that many coincidences in the world? That guy definitely isn't a god. It can't be that he has something to do with the Evolus gods, can it? Riveria's slender brows drew together slightly, but the speculation that had arisen in her mind was quickly dismissed. Evolus's objective was to completely overturn Rio and bring the Labyrinth City to ruin. If Ron really had anything to do with Evolus, then when the dungeon had produced that mutated floor boss, there was no reason for him to risk his life to slay that dragon. She gently shook her head. Absolutely impossible. I think the most likely answer is that there's something special about Ron that warrants even the dungeon going out of its way to target him. At this point in the conversation, both Finn and Riveria found themselves entertaining an unrealistic thought. The seed of a hero. But even Ace Wallenstein, who was similarly gifted, did not receive this kind of treatment from the dungeon. Taking Ron's relationship with Lafia into account, and considering that Ron was the captain of his familia, Finn stopped walking and swept his gaze across all the members present. For the first time ever, the blonde boy's attitude was utterly serious. About what happened today? I don't want to hear even the slightest rumor about it in Rio. Even if you've already formed your own guesses, it still concerns the other party's secret. As for the exact situation, we'll discuss it after I've asked Lady Loki. As the Familia's core members Tiona and Tioni, the werewolf Bet, and the dwarf Gareth, as well as the members of the expedition's first unit present there, all looked at one another, but none of them objected. They understood that Captain Finn was not joking at a time like this. Besides, even if they were interested in the secret Ron carried, there were many reasons to approach him directly. As for gossiping behind his back, they disdained doing something like that. Continue the return trip. Because they had split up, and because of the delay on the 12th floor, their return to Rio had been slowed somewhat. During the rest of the journey, the atmosphere was a little heavy. Even after returning to the Loki Familia's residence, Finn and Riveria did not stop for even a moment. It was not because they were dealing with the tedious affairs that came after a Familia expedition, but because they wanted to use a god's means to obtain information related to Ron. And then, they saw the god Loki, sitting on the sofa with narrowed eyes like some middle-aged uncle, along with the guild receptionist Ina, seated in a single chair. The main reason Ina was there was due to business assigned by the Adventurers Guild. But for the moment, Finn had no time to deal with that. His eyes were filled with urgency as he looked toward Loki. The blonde boy got straight to the point and asked directly that, "Lady Loki, while we were carrying out the dungeon expedition, did you happen to hear in Rio about an adventurer named Ron? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/Tito Viller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.